Hello, Margaret, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming. And today we're talking about PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain to us a little bit about that diagnosis in a medical sense?
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not a doctor, so I don't really...
Of course, yeah.
But it's basically you have enlarged ovaries that then have many small cysts on the outside of them, and the side effects can be all sorts of different things for different women. For me personally, it means that my body doesn't naturally menstruate. It doesn't naturally give me my period. But for other women, it can mean things all the way from infertility to kind of pain and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a very varied diagnosis, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when did you... So I feel like there's this rhetoric in high school where it's, if your period hasn't come yet, it's fine. You know, it's it will come eventually. You know, each girl is maturing at her own rate, whatever.
Yeah.
Or each person is maturing at their own rate, rather. What was your experience in high school with your period? Did it ever come at any point? Yes.
Yeah, so it did come. So I think I was about late 15, early 16, which was pretty late. Pretty much I was the second last girl, I think, to get it in my group. And I think, for me personally, I was really concerned about it. I was really like, oh, what does this mean? Am I never going to get it kind of thing? And then when it finally came, I was super relieved. But then it was very regular, which is normal at the beginning of getting your period. But then there was a stretch of 9 months where I didn't have it. And we were like, that's not normal. So, yeah, we went to a doctor and from there the diagnosis occurred, yeah.
And how did they diagnose it? What was the procedure involved?
Yeah, it was pretty invasive. So it was like an internal ultrasound, which is where they actually have to look on the inside of the body to check for cysts. And then after that, it was kind of frustrating, the process of doing it, because I think there isn't much research around PCOS and there isn't much understanding of why it happens or anything like that. So we kind of didn't really know what it was, and I had never heard of it before when I was doing it. So and going through that process, I didn't know what it meant. But yeah, so they could see that there were cysts, but they didn't actually give the diagnosis until 2 years later. But they put me on the contraceptive pill immediately, not for contraception, but for regulating the period, yeah.
So I had a similar-ish experience in that when I don't remember, it was like 3 years ago, I lost my period for a whole year.
Yeah, right.
And I went and I did that I'm making the invasive thing with my hand. I did that ultrasound, and did you get to see the ultrasound as it was going?
Yeah.
How disturbing is that?
And there was all this stuff about I don't know if you had this, but there was so many rules about drinking water and how much water you had to have in your body and all that stuff. And it was just really daunting because I was 17 at the time. So I was still pretty young, and I was just like, oh my God, what's happening to me? And I found it quite painful as well.
You might not have had something ever up there before.
No, I hadn't. So I was very oh, what's happening?
Yeah.
And even though the lady was super lovely, it was just quite scary to see the insides of my body on a screen.
Oh, it was so weird. When I was lying back, and I remember we were just chatting. I'm a very chatty person, so we were just, talking. She asked me what I was doing at uni, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, I see, these little tiny meteors. They look like little meteors, and they look like they've got holes in them, right? Yeah. And I suddenly said to her, I was like, that's not good, is it? I just, all my chat disappeared. I just looked at it, and I was like, that doesn't look right. And she says, oh, yeah, so those are little cysts on your ovaries. And I said, so they're not holes? And she says, no, they're not holes. And I just left, and I've never looked at myself in the mirror and thought that was what was inside of me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know, what was your experience like leaving the leaving the ultrasound area?
Well, I think the main thing was I was super scared of having cysts on my ovaries. I didn't realize how common it was for women because I'd had one of my friend's mums had a very serious case of cysts on the ovaries where she actually had to have surgery to remove them, and that was my only knowledge that I had of them. So I was like, oh my God, I don't want to get surgery. I don't want this to happen. And so I think when they said there were cysts on my ovaries, I was kind of like panicking and being like, oh gosh, I'm going to have surgery and all that stuff. But actually, turns out it's a very common, many women have that.
Many women have it. And I remember my doctor saying to me at the time that the first things that she told me to do was get a blood test for my sugars and stuff. Is that what happened with you as well, or?
Yeah, so there were blood tests and like, all sorts of other tests as well. But I think then when they did the internal ultrasound, they determined that it was indeed PCOS. I don't really remember what the blood tests were for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did it take 2 years between that and the diagnosis?
Yeah, so there was just, they weren't 100% sure because when you're that young, they're not, they kind of say that once you're around 20, 21, then they can confirm whether it is or isn't. And because I was still 17, they were like, it might just be as a result of maturing. But obviously that is not the case. And so, yeah, it was kind of confusing because I was young and being put on the pill from such a young age was very confronting, I think, for me.
Yeah.
Especially since I wasn't sexually active at the time. So I was just kind of like, well, I have to take this pill every day. And yeah, didn't really know anything about it or anything like that. Yeah.
Did you experience any discomfort associated with PCOS or?
I didn't experience any pain, but I also just, they say that if you don't regulate the period, then you are at higher risk of having lack of fertility or low fertility later in life. So if you don't actually force your body to menstruate, then you can end up not being able to have children if you want to do that later.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So they advise you to go on the pill as kind of a preemptive thing that your body gets used to.
Yeah.
Used to producing those hormones, etc.
Yeah. So it's not just like your body isn't doing it and then you expect to be able to reproduce later in life. Yeah.
Are you still on the pill now?
Yes.
I hope that's not a horrible question.
No, it's not a horrible question. I still am. And yeah, it's kind of a daunting thought to be like, I'm going to be taking the pill until I'm like 50 and,
having
no longer having my period.
Sure.
In order to, or at least until I'm having children. It's kind of a daunting thing because there's obviously lots of conversations around whether the pill is good for you or not.
Well, that's what in high school, I never had thought about this, but then, now at university, people are constantly talking about whether or not the pill is good for you or bad for you, et cetera, et cetera. And my friend went through a real phase of being like, oh, no, I'm not taking the pill anymore. It's bad for you. I'm going to be natural. And kind of blaming, like making me feel bad for taking the pill at the time. Yeah. And I was just like, stop putting this down my throat. That's your choice. This is my choice.
Yeah.
And do you find that? Do you find that you have to, I mean, obviously you're doing this for a medical reason, but do you feel like you have to justify things like that? Or
I think so, yeah. I think it's like, I also have to justify it to myself because I think even though I know that I'm taking it for a medical reason, I think, I've had friends that have all sorts of horrible side effects from the pill.
Yeah.
And even though I haven't really experienced much of that, I'm still like scared that it's coming. You know what I mean?
And also sometimes curious, like, oh, well, maybe me crying once a week isn't because I'm just really, really stressed. Maybe it is the pill. Maybe if I stop taking the pill, I'll feel better. That kind of, do you...
Yeah. I think it's a very mental kind of like...
game.
Jump and game to like make in terms of whether the weighing up the benefits and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Have you tried multiple brands? Or did you just go on one specific one and have you stuck with it?
I went on one specific one and it was like the lowest dose I could have, so that it's not very strong or anything like that because I don't get much period pain or anything like that, obviously, because it's essentially a kind of forced period, essentially. So, but yeah, so I haven't really had any kind of really bad side effects or anything like that. Yeah.
That's good. And when you got the diagnosis, well, when you were 17, did they say this was potentially the diagnosis, but we can't confirm? So then when you were, like, what did you do? My first instinct when this thing happens to me is to Google.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
is that what you...
Yeah, and kind of Googled and started reading about how, I think it's somewhere between like 15 to 20% of women in Australia are affected by PCOS, so like, quite a lot. And I think we were really surprised, like my mum and I, she helped me through it, and we were reading about it and we were like, what? We'd never even heard of this. Even my mum, who's obviously, much older than me, had never heard of it or only vaguely. And I think I was really shocked that there wasn't much education to like help me feel like I wasn't weird. Because I think that because I have some other friends from high school who got their period late as well, who also have PCOS. And I think we were all in the same boat of being like, oh, I'm weird because I didn't get my period in like grade 6 or whatever is the average age. And so we kind of felt very insecure. Oh, I personally definitely felt quite insecure about it even when I was that age.
Like what you said, I was the second last person in my group. It's a topic of conversation that comes up so regularly in high school that it feels like you're being reminded, oh, yeah, it hasn't happened for me. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and I definitely remember some of the other girls being like, oh, like, are you like healthy? Like, are you okay? When I said that I hadn't gotten my period yet. And I think that was like it was kind of shaming. Like, I think there was some kind of shaming over the fact that we had got, like, the girls that had gotten it late or whatever. And I definitely felt like, oh, maybe that makes me, like, not as much of a woman or whatever, which was really dumb. But, like, at the time I was thinking it,
So I don't have polycystic ovary syndrome as a chronic, like a lifelong thing. At one point I had cysts on my ovaries and they thought, oh, maybe it'll be polycystic ovary syndrome. And it turned out to be a problem with my insulin. So maybe it is, and that's the other thing, is that there's just not enough clarity in women's health to be like, I don't know.
Absolutely.
There's no terms, there's no anything. Whereas, you look up a cold and you can get all the symptoms. You look up this, you can get all these symptoms.
Yeah.
I don't know what the frick is going on down there. So
No.
I remember after seeing the x-ray and them telling me it's probably this, I Googled it on the train home. And I had recently gone out of a long-term relationship and I was very convinced that I was never, ever going to have love again or never have sex again, blah, blah, blah. And then I was always like, it's fine because I'll be able to have children by myself. I'll just be a single mother. And then I was going through and it was like, oh, you might be infertile, this. And exactly that thought. I was like, why can't my body just do what it's meant to do? Yeah. I was so upset. I was like, why can't I just be... Why isn't it being normal?
Yeah.
Like, am I not a woman? Like, am I not capable of being a mother and all those things? And that's such a narrow definition of,
yeah, absolutely,
of motherhood, of womanhood, of all of those, heteronormative concepts. But, and as smart as I am, and as aware of that as I was, it comes into your head and you're just like, I hate this.
Yeah, well, because I remember being like, when we kind of confirmed the diagnosis, I was like, what do I need to do to ensure that I'll be able to have kids later? Like, and I was asking all these doctors, like, because I went to specialists and gynecologists and all this stuff, and I was like, what do I need to do? Like, do I need to freeze my eggs or something? And they were like, no. But for me, I was very anxious about it, even though, like, I'm not 100% sure that I want to have kids, but just, like, the thought of not having the choice was so scary to me, even though it's very far away in my mind. It was, like, at the time, such at the forefront of like, but will my life even be complete kind of thought process, which I think was really unfair that I had never even been mildly mentally prepared for
That's exactly
this
it.
possibility.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
You don't know about these different circumstances, etc. prior to getting your period. So you just expect it to happen. And then at 21?
Yeah.
I think I was 22 at the time, you're suddenly told and you're like, well, I've got 22 years of unlearning to do about what my future could be or what, my preparation could be for fertility.
Yeah.
Because for me, I don't know if your doctor had this conversation with you, and I guess this isn't something I dealt with long term, but she said if this stuff recurs, she said the important thing is that you have it. because when you do try to get pregnant, there's people and specialists that you can see.
Yeah.
And she said, whereas a lot of women go through a long time not knowing they have it and not getting pregnant and doing all these different, you know, procedures and treatments, etc., to no avail because of something that is treatable and, you know, can be done. And she said it's not a bad thing to get this diagnosis because you know now. You have the education now that you can be aware of it. Do you know what I mean?
No, I absolutely agree, because I think, you know, I remember reflecting on it a lot at the time, and I was kind of like, you know, when we were in school and we learned about, you know, periods and how to manage our period, I was like, how about preparing us for like the possibility that it's not going to be just like every month it comes la-di-da, whatever.
Yeah.
How about, you know, actually talking about the different processes? And even though you don't necessarily have to go into detail, I think if I had even known slightly, I think that would have made it a lot easier, as opposed to being like, oh, now I'm kind of this like, you know, I felt like an alien or whatever for having something that like not all the other girls had. But I think as I've gotten older and I've gone to university and I've met lots of people from all sorts of different walks of life, so many of them talk about experiences with cysts on their ovary or PCOS. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't know. Why hadn't I heard of it?
Yeah, and this also sounds like this is just a general musing on my behalf. But PCOS, like the very kind of acronym makes it sound scary. And like polycystic ovary syndrome, it's like, well, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, there's no just casual way of saying, oh, I have to deal with this. You know, I have to deal with cysts or something. Like, you know, there's no nice cliche way of saying something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's there's so many terms and things that I've had to learn over the time, but like nothing that has made me be like, oh yeah, this is what I have, and I can articulate it clearly without freaking people out about what it is. And like having to explain that to partners and that kind of thing is a whole process of like talking about it and what it means, and you know how that functions in a relationship is a whole kind of thing, I think. Yeah.
What do you think society or individuals can do to better those conversations around just alternative experiences of periods?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really starts with educating women on it. I also think that there's not enough funding put into women's health in general. I think that there are a lot of research suggests that diseases and conditions that affect men have such a more significant amount of funding being put towards them than diseases and syndromes and things like that affect women. And the fact that this condition affects so many women, even just in Australia, let alone across the world, and we don't even know why it happens, is a huge testament, I think, to the fact that not enough funding and research is being put into it. And even though I know great female doctors that are doing so much to try and further it, I think that it's like, if we don't have the backing of institutions behind us, how can we ever get that message widespread? And I think talking about it in schools is a really important thing personally. Like, I think since I was so young and I, as I said, felt really isolated because of it. I think even if we had one lesson where we talked about periods that weren't just the norm, that would have made all the difference to me in feeling less kind of alone. And I didn't feel like I had anybody that I could talk to aside from my mum and stuff, which, you know, love her. But like, you know, sometimes it's nice to be able to talk about that stuff with your friends. And I think for a long time I didn't talk to any of my high school friends about it because I didn't want them to be like, you know, you're unhealthy, you're this, whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, also because, like you've said about education, you don't have all the answers to make them less worried or anything about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still feel like every time that I read something about PCOS, I learn so much more, but it kind of complicates it or suggests so many different alternatives as to why it might happen or how to deal with it and that kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of conflicting ideas out there that mean that it's kind of confusing for women or young women especially to know how to manage it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I've really enjoyed learning about this.
Thank you.